We are on item 3, board member elections. Thank you, Grant. You can go ahead and begin your presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So the item number 3 before you is the notice of board elections. So this is the 5th set of elections we've had for the 3 members elected by active members of our system. The election will be in the fall of 2019, and the members successful in that election will be seated January 1st, 2020. I wanted to begin with a quick introduction. So our Ombudsman Tom Barrett also serves as our election coordinator, and he's been helping a lot with the planning. And he's in the back there. Thank you, Tom. Okay, so the regulation, what you have in the packet is the board notice of election, which includes regulations. It includes timelines for candidates filing and timelines for the election. And then also some of the rules around campaign reporting. So the regulations that we adopted in 2003 for the elections and then updated in 2009 require the board to issue a notice of election to members. And so that's what this agenda item serves as. And in the back of the packet, there's a resolution for your consideration to adopt, which is adopting the notice of regulations or notice of election. I'm sorry, what?
That includes the timeline and everything that goes with that, correct?
Correct. Okay. So I guess that completes my prepared remarks, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. Also, I should note that in the actual packet, the notice of elections, there's a number of stylistic and grammatical changes that Ms. Yamamoto was kind enough to send to us. So they aren't really substantive, but we appreciate the suggestions. So if you do approve the document today, we'll make those minor changes.
All right. Are there any questions? Steve?
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and move the item.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any further questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
That goes up soon, right? Like tomorrow? Or would that be up today?
Tomorrow or today on the when the notice goes up?
The notice will go up on the website tomorrow.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. All righty. State and federal legislation. Joycelyn, why don't you come on up? There you are. And I'm thinking you might want a little bit of personal privilege granted.
Yes, a point of personal privilege. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a moment. My parents are visiting this week and are attending the board meeting, and wanted to take a moment to introduce my mother, Brenda Wade, and my father, Miguel Martinez, in the back of the room.
You need to stand up. Stand up. Yeah, you got to stand up. We always want to make people stand up.
Get the momentum. And I want to introduce them because my mother taught for 40 years in Southern California at the Montebello Unified School District. And she's been retired for 11 years. So
Congratulations.
Just like me. Excellent. So thank you for that opportunity. I really appreciate it. And then to dive into the work at hand, I'm going to start with the first bill on the list to take a position on. It's Assembly Joint Resolution 41, one you'll be familiar with from the past. It requests that the Congress and the President enact legislation to repeal the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision. As you know, we've taken support positions on these in the past. That's part of your legislative policy. And so the staff recommendation is to support this measure.
Are there any questions on the legislation? Entertain them. Steve?
Yeah, I'll move that.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Any abstentions? We have 2 abstentions. All righty. Motion passes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The second bill is SB 783 by Senator Pan. And then to start off, I kind of wanted to provide some context. around this bill. As you'll recall, we had requested, and there was a hearing, an informational hearing on divestment in January this year, where they talked about the risks that divestment carries, in adversely affecting the investment portfolio and severing any ability to advocate from a shareholder perspective, and discuss the view that engagement is a way that you can come to change in corporations and in that field. And one of the ideas that was brought up at that hearing, they pointed out that there's a program at the UC that reviews legislation that either mandates healthcare provisions or repeals mandates of healthcare provisions. And that's a step that all legislation that does that has to go through. That program has 60 days to review, and then they provide the information to the legislative committees. So this bill takes a cue from that process and requests the UC to develop a program that would analyze any divestment legislation that was introduced that the committees or the leadership of the legislature request to be reviewed, and then that analysis would be provided to the legislature. We worked with the author's office on amendments, so we had a couple minor concerns when it came out, and so they actually took amendments that clarified the intent, and we made sure that the fiduciary language that we're familiar with is in the bill. And we thought that those were good moves. So in the end, we have a staff recommendation of neutral.
Lynn?
Thank you, Madam President. The controller has gone on record as being opposed to this bill for a number of reasons. One is the duplication of efforts between this new program and CalSTRS staff, because understandably, we believe that the commission would have to work closely with CalSTRS staff to understand the portfolio and the risks and go through the review. And then in the latest write-up, it appears that the annual funding would be about $2 million a year, which again, she feels is a waste of state resources and duplication of efforts. And furthermore, there is a concern about, although the board's authority and fiduciary duties are still preserved within this bill, it does seem to be kind of an encroachment on the authority of the board when it comes to reviewing divestment and engagement process, and we clearly have a policy that's laid out to address those issues. For those reasons, I move that the board adopt an opposed position on this bill.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second to the motion? Motion dies. Lack of a second. Are there any further questions? About the bill?
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sharon.
So Joyce, we've talked about, this has been, how long have we been, it's been a year-ish plus, or?
Yeah.
Back and forth
About
with-
having that hearing and going to that.
So, because I appreciate, the controllers, I guess I would like to have more help in fleshing out pros and cons of the neutral, I remember our conversation previous about our concerns, and it sounds like Senator Pound's office has made accommodations. We're staying neutral, or the recommendation is to stay neutral. What are some of the pros and cons if we were to take an oppose versus to stay neutral? Could you just flesh that out a little bit more so that I can think through my own perspective given Lynn's motion? I just want to
Could I just want to just to start, one thing, I'm not sure how much we emphasized it, and Joy, I don't know if you share this view with me, but on the healthcare side and the health insurance side, the reason that model's in place, and it's in place in many states in the country, I think at least half states have mandate review laws, is that there was just a high volume of frivolous ideas being put forth that would raise the cost of health insurance, and there wasn't a feeling there was any kind of hurdle to introducing those bills, and there needed to be some independent, serious analysis, even though an insurance commissioner's office would do the analysis, much if you want to equate that to our role here. There was a view that there was benefit in having independent fiscal analysis done of health insurance proposals, and that hurdle would create some barrier, at least that people would say, wait a minute, before just introducing bills. So I think from the regulatory side, my view, that's had a positive effect. And, you know, Joy works in the industry, she knows probably better than I would now on that. And I think that was the thinking behind this on the staff was well-intentioned, which was, is there just a way to set the bar higher here than just introducing bills? So that's one qualitative factor, I guess I would put it, that was in the staff's thinking at the legislature around this bill, was reflecting on what's happened in the health insurance market.
Okay. And remaining neutral, or taking a neutral stance from our perspective, allows.
I think it makes it easier for the bill to move forward. With an oppose, I imagine it would be very difficult. As Ms. Paquin pointed out, there is a $2 million appropriation in the bill, which we did not comment on from our perspective. That would be going to the UC to form the program. And that's something that I believe they'll be discussing I know they'll be discussing in the Appropriations Committee, which will be its next stop.
Right, so there's a cost, there's a price tag.
They have associated a cost with it. It's a $2 million appropriation for the first year, and then they're looking at it being part of the regular budgeting process at the same amount in out years.
Jacqueline?
So Department of Finance has not taken a position on this bill, but I did want to appreciate Lynn's comments about, you know, potentially you're spending $2 million on some general fund on something that a program that may heavily rely on efforts that CalSTRS staff are already undertaking. We're already doing that sort of analysis here. So I think that, and I don't want to mischaracterize your point, Lynn, but that it was a question of value, and should we be sort of neutral? I would take it a step further to say, do you need to take a position at all? Obviously, Michelle and I are going to abstain, so pleasure of the board, but, you know, is there a need to take a position? You know, if the board truly is indifferent, I think neutral does give a positive signal. That's all.
Steve?
Yeah, this is outside the policy, because I may feel differently about the policy, but I worry, and I defer to staff to comment, when we've worked with, and I've said this before, when we work with an author and we get them to accept amendments, and again, it's the prerogative of the board necessarily in the final determination, but I want to be respectful of staff who've gone and in earnest tried to work with an author, got them to accept amendments, and now we'd come back and say, oh, by the way, we're going to oppose your bill, even though you did what we asked you to do. So I'd ask the staff to just give comment on that.
Right, I think you point out the difficulty with that position of taking an oppose. I think that they were looking at ways to help, and as Jack described, this extra space where this analysis could be done, where time could be taken before a divestment measure moves forward quickly, which sometimes are introduced, you know, in the heat of the moment with policy issues that are really current events. And so it does take a moment to step back and allow a third party to look at it. And in that nature of trying to help the systems approach those bills and working with us, I think that's where a neutral position would be most helpful. It has the connotation of being more positive, as Jacqueline said. There's a possibility to not take a position, but it definitely does, you know, step into the area that we are acting in. So I think it would behoove us to take a position.
And just to add a little bit of context, and not only has the author taken amendments, but about 1.5 years ago, we were directed by the board to go talk about our message about engagement versus divestment. And so we've done that. And in a way, this is part of the response to, all right, you know, we see there's an issue there. And so this is one of the, you know, one of the initiatives that was raised in response to the concerns that we brought up.
Joy?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up on Jack's comments. You know, the health research group that's set up to look at healthcare mandates, I think, has proven valuable because there are so many different stakeholders in a healthcare debate around a mandate that might weigh in on an issue that have different opinions. So having that objective source was important. I guess my question is, I see it differently on this issue because I think largely, you know, to the point that Lynn made earlier, the staff at UC that would be looking at this, I think would be largely drawing on information and data that they would get from CalPERS and CalSTRS. So I guess I just wonder, I mean, I'm sort of thinking through the comments that you made about the, you know, duplication as well as is it as critical to have an independent entity in this situation as it might be in other industries or in other policy issues?
Lynn?
Thank you. I just question also how much staff time from the investment office and the actuaries will be involved with working with this commission, because we also have a philosophy here that we engage because we want to continue to have an active voice to make the changes that we feel is necessary that's leading to people to qualified divestment. And if you have a separate commission without that history or that understanding and not a full understanding of the portfolio, will they also understand that concept, or will they just look at it on a material impact? And what does that do to our benchmarks after a time if we end up starting to divest more and more because we have this commission who doesn't have the full picture? So I think that it could lead to a lot of misinformation around that, and also to a lot of staff resources being used. And I see Mr. Illman coming up, so I don't know if he's planning to comment.
So I'll let Mr. Aylman speak to that, but when a divestment bill does come up, it sets into motion a lot of work that we already do, and so I'm not sure Chris will answer whether that's, potential for duplication or not.
Chris?
Hi, Chris Aylman, Chief Investment Officer for the record. It may surprise you, I'm actually kind of positive on the idea. Yes, it would be more work. I think obviously you'd still have to take a fiduciary position on everyone. But right now, the bills seem to run through the committees so fast, we get very little input, and they come to the conclusions so quick. This seemed like at least a little bit of a circuit breaker in that process, that it would have a chance to pause and maybe talk to if it's the University of California, a highly educated group, and who knows what the environment will be like, but more of an intellectual dialogue about that. I agree with the concerns on both sides. Nothing's a perfect fix, but clearly what we have now within the legislative process, to give you an analogy, it feels like popcorn. Every legislator has an idea, and boy, they just pop up, and because there's so many bills on their desk, I think they just think it's fine, we oppose it, they don't care, and they move on. So it's tough. But we actually tried to give some input that we thought structured properly. I'm sure there would be some tough times at the start of this as they built out that commission, but maybe a little bit of a pause on opportunity before it became a hard law.
And just to follow up on that comment, that's an interesting comment about the timing, Chris. So I'm curious, Grant, have you talked to them about putting in some kind of a circuit breaker and saying that divestment bills have to be 2-year bills? You can't run in the same session.
There have been various discussions about how they can push pause for a moment, and I think there's, again, lots of different ideas have been considered, and I remember hearing about 2-year bills and something like that, and I don't know that they've found a way to execute that, and so I think this is the idea that's come out to play that out in a way that's implementable.
And if this commission has a turnaround time of 60 days, then does that give them enough time to be thoughtful about the analysis?
I think they have to report back on the implementation of the legislation. So if they are working on it and they find it's not, there would be an opportunity for them to come back and say that this isn't working.
I would just add, that's the challenge of the unknowns of who's on that commission, how educated are they into index funds, into complex institutional investment portfolios, and any of the legislative processes, we're scrambling in the investment office. We're now very attuned to February and all the bills dropping in, suddenly putting things aside and working on these issues as quickly as we can. And that's why I realize there will probably be bumps in the road as to whether how this commission's filled out and the robustness of its knowledge, particularly in institutional investments. So that is a concern, but I don't have a good answer on how it would work in that time period.
And just to point out that the bill does require that actuarial professionals and experts in public pension fund investments be included in their analysis. So they would be speaking to people who may have that history, should have that history, and be able to give those comments. And I think the author's office is open to, obviously, again, this is a an effort they're putting forth to try to help the systems when they are faced with these issues. And I think there'll be ability to work on it into the future and kind of formulate and form what this program would look like.
Lynn, did you have anything further?
No, thank you.
All right, I have several questions before I make my comments. The California Actuarial Advisory Panel, we've had one of our actuaries sit on that. Was that just by chance, or is that something that we will continue to be able to do to have input into who sits on the Actuarial Advisory Panel?
So that's the way that it's designed in statute. It specifically calls out CalPERS and CalSTRS actuaries.
So we will always have somebody sitting on that panel.
In
All
the
right,
rest of the law,
also,
yeah.
Joycelyn, do we have a position like watch, more so than neutral, that maybe we're taking a more active interest than just staying neutral?
Sure, we do have a watch position.
We do have a watch position. And then also, when they talk about collaborating with experts and using the university's resources, was there any talk when they were talking about the university's resources that they would be speaking with the university's foundation, maybe the investment experts that they have that invest for the university?
I'm not remembering anything specific to that.
Alrighty. Then I think I'm ready to make my comments. I do, collaborating with experts in the public pension investment profession, depending on who is asking, those experts can come from a myriad of positions, and that gives me some pause. I totally appreciate the fact that we wanted to educate the legislature on engagement and divestment, and they want to help us. But there's language in here that does concern me. And I get the whole money part of it. That just seems like an outrageous amount of money, but depending on who they tap, I can understand why that the bill could go that high on an annual basis. So I'm seeing both pros and cons to it. When they talked about experts, so I guess one of the points I'm trying to make is when they talk, they're going to use the services that are certified actuary or other person as recommended by the California Actuarial Advisory Panel. We're going to get to have input on who that person is. But we don't necessarily have that same type of input on what experts they're going to be asking. And so if there could be a way, I don't know how we would even go about that, weighing in on who they tap. I guess not so much weighing in on who they tap, but if we could weigh in if we were opposed to somebody that they tapped, I think that might benefit us. And my final comment would be I would hate to find us in a position where we frequently, if this commission goes through, that we find ourselves operating contrary to what the commission finds. So that we've supported the idea, and then once everything is said and done and analyses start coming back and bills start to roll through, if we then act contrary to what those analyses are, that taking into consideration our fiduciary responsibility, we kind of put the kibosh on it. And I appreciate putting the pause on it. I just have some trepidation moving forward in this area. So with that said.
Just want to emphasize, I think on the one hand, if it has any integrity, the process, there has to be some boundaries around independence, or it doesn't have value to the process. So you don't want to design a bill that's captive to us or CalPERS, and you might as well just not do it. So, but at the same time, we certainly have the ability to put on a legislative record, just like we do now, if it's a faulty analysis or they're experts with ideological biases. I think we would be put it on the record, and our voice would be respected for that, for our expertise. So that piece I worry less about.
You're not-
I mean,
you're not
just
as
like in health
hesitant.
insurance, there's some crazy ideas that have no bearing, but sometimes every once in a while, there's been very valid issues that have come through as mandates that get credibility.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate your comments.
I was
Alrighty.
gonna, just sorry to add.
No,
on
that's fine,
Jack's
Chris, go
comments,
for it.
and with my limited knowledge of, this is modeled after that health insurance idea a little bit. There are still times where that commission approves stuff that the industry opposes, but you're right, you would not be in a position, you do not want to be in a position where you're constantly opposing them.
Right.
But it is that pause to the legislature of adopting a bill and giving us a chance to have a discussion.
Alrighty. Steve?
This is CBRP, which I'm familiar with through UC. They provide analysis to the legislature. The legislature will work off of that analysis, and they may or may not agree. So it's not as though we're battling so much this new group. It's the legislature who's going to make a decision based on that analysis.
Right.
No, that's a good point. And the legislature who can and does, develop divestment bills also would be the ones who this analysis is going to, so.
All right. Any further comment before I go to public? Jennifer, you're up. Yes.
Good morning, Jennifer Baker, the California Teachers Association. I appreciate the very complex situation that the board is in. I did want to let you know that CTA has a support position, although hearing the dilemma that you have, we certainly understand it's difficult to try to decide what's the best route to move forward. This is a direct result of the hearing that had taken place earlier this year that you had asked for to try to help educate the legislature. So it's always the be careful what you wish for, because this is the legislature's attempt to be helpful. So one of the questions that you may want to consider is this bill better than what is currently happening? For context, when the turkey bill was brought up a few weeks ago, Joycelyn and I have to say made a really good team. We were the primary witnesses on the bill to explain the complexities that this could have on your investments and specifically on AB 1469. Those technical considerations were not taken into account. A significant amount of time in the committee hearing was spent on presentations and collaborations with CalPERS. But yet, there was never an opportunity for that committee to consider and recognize the significant amount of time that you as a board had on that bill in showing the seriousness and the weight that you had had that conversation in. So that is currently not happening. The question is, would this bill create a better scenario? Maybe yes, maybe no. If your concern is that this is not the right direction, I would highly encourage you to consider making a recommendation either for a sponsored bill or a future bill with, well, what would that recommendation be that you would think would be actuarially sound, that would significantly reflect the weight from your investments divisions, CalPERS's investments divisions, and present that to the legislature. Because the reality is, if there is not some comprehensive solution, we are going to have the current environment. And my understanding from your discussions and the discussions we've had as an organization is the existing environment isn't doing due diligence and justice to the fiscal impact that these will have not only on the funds, but the retirement security of the members as well. So I don't know exactly where you may want to go, but we're in this with you, and this is going to be a long-term conversation, unfortunately.
All right, any further questions? This is an action item. Steve?
I'm in a slightly difficult position. I'll be very forthright in explaining it. The treasurer voted to oppose this bill at CalPERS. And I want to be true to that position. But, so the question, maybe it's a parliamentary question, I didn't realize that we weren't going to get to the point where we would be able to at least vote on Lynn's and I should have spoken up
Oh, right.
and given it a second. So I guess I'm asking the question, can we revisit the original motion?
And there can be a new motion made. That particular motion failed, but that doesn't mean that after the discussion, another motion can't be made.
Okay.
So
So if that's the case, I'm happy to make Lynn's motion again, just to be, I want to be true to the treasurer's original position in CalPERS. And so with that, I'll make the motion to oppose the bill.
Is there a second?
Second.
All righty. Now we're going to be discussing the opposed position.
Yeah, and I apologize for the
No, that's
confusion.
okay. We can get there. We use Roberts how we need to use Roberts. All righty. Did you want to speak any further to your motion? All righty. Lynn?
Thank you. I had a question for Mr. Bartow, and I just wanted to make sure that the bill as it's currently written doesn't violate the board's plenary authority at all.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a complex question, because the board's plenary authority, every time it's been challenged, hasn't been necessarily upheld, at least that phrase. But in reviewing the bill, we took pains to ensure that the board's fiduciary responsibility remains primary and unfettered. And that's why the language is in there. So the board continues to act according to its fiduciary duty independently of any direction from outside.
Okay.
And that language is specifically negotiated and put into the legislation,
Okay.
as we do in other similar bills.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to make sure I understand that. So that basically means the board can make a decision about a divestment issue that I don't want to use the word I was going to use, but it has more weight than what the commission could say about a particular divestment issue. Is that?
Yeah, the way the process would work is not to fetter your discretion and your ability to make a decision. I think, as you've heard, the idea is to push back on the legislature as far as moving these bills forward. But, you could have a request for divestment or to address divestment independently of anything that comes out of the legislature, and you would put that through your normal process.
Right.
And so you would maintain all of your independence as far as decision-making.
So let me ask the question, in light of some of the discussion, Chris's input, and the input that we've received, and in acknowledging that this is something that has, it's a response to our educational ask and wanting to educate the legislature and their staff a little bit more about our philosophies about divestment and engagement. Is there, and Steve, I'll go to you and Lynn, is there anything in here that would, I'm not quite sure how to ask this. Is there any, instead of just, I guess, I won't even put it to you guys, I'll put it to the board. Is there any redeeming qualities about what's before us that would actually have us say oppose unless amended? So do we have any amendments that we would want to add to this that would make it what we would need in order to work further with the author? I think once we oppose a bill, then we will do whatever we can to kill the bill. And is there any redeeming qualities to this that maybe would want us to work with it, with the author further? Harry.
I wanted to ask Lynn, if you could just summarize your view on why oppose as opposed to the neutral, so I can just understand the rationale.
So Lynn,
Thanks.
you're next up in, and I can come back to you.
Yeah, I just want to know the
questions.
rationale.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the question. From the controller's point of view, this just adds another layer of staff work and responding to these requests through the commission to be set up at UC. And there's a real concern that who will be on this commission, will they fully understand our long-held philosophy? What do they think about our approach to engagement? Because, you know, if you look at some of the divestment requests on a material basis, they're not large. But it's always been our belief that as you start to divest more and more and you have a greater variance with the benchmarks and you're losing your seat at the table to affect change, that has not been where this fund has wanted to go. And so it seems to be in opposition to our long-held beliefs in our process. And we are fully sympathetic to the time crunch that these bills are introduced and acted upon. And I totally agree that it would be great to have more time built into the process. But I don't think that this commission addresses that.
All righty, is there any further discussion on the motion to oppose? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All in favor of the opposed position on SB 783, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Nay.
Nay.
Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. We will have opposed position on SB 783. All right. Thanks, Grant. Joycelyn?
And I have some
Chris?
additional updates that I wanted to give you on
Please.
some other pieces of legislation. As Jennifer mentioned, AB 1597, the bill that asks us to divest from investment vehicles from Turkey. So that bill was a 2-year bill introduced in 2017. When you took an opposed position on it, it has actually moved through 2 policy committees. So it moved through the Senate Retirement Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee with a commitment to amend the bill. And the bill's been amended. So now all portions of the bill are contingent upon federal law imposing sanctions on Turkey for failure to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. And if that were to happen, if the acknowledgement were to happen, then it would repeal the provisions of this bill. So those are the additions with the amendments. And unless there's any objection, I am going to maintain the opposed position, and that's what we'll communicate to the legislature when it's up in Senate Appropriations when they return from their break.
Anyone? I think we're going to maintain the opposed.
Okay.
Oh, hang on a second.
Just, and I apologize, but it's
Go ahead.
actually back to the last, because I kind of felt like the transition was from the decision. I guess I want to know from you, Joycelyn, back on the previous bill, what is the communication like going back then to Senator Pan's? I mean, I guess I feel a certain degree of, to me, the vehicle that was presented to us was not palatable to some on the board, and that's why the vote went the way I think it went. But I wonder how the communication can go back, because it does seem like, to Lynn's point about the expanded time frame, or I always kind of feel like when people come to complain to me as a union leader, it's like, give me solutions or give me other, so you don't like this, what would you like? And so I guess I would like to hear back, whether that's here or offline, but that conversation, because I certainly want it to be communicated that we appreciate Senator Pan and the legislature's willingness to try and problem solve this issue. And I think the question is, what's the best tool moving forward? So I guess I would just like to flesh that a little bit more, and because I realize it puts you in a challenging position as well. But I also feel like clearly there was, some challenges around that. So if we could just hear back from.
So Sharon, what I'd like to do is I was going to wait until we were done with the
okay.
item and
Sure.
then talk a little bit about that
Okay.
and the message we'd like to go back.
Sure.
As everybody
wanna
has
leave
it.
it without-
Absolutely. I wanted to give everybody time to kind of process. So let's finish that, but
Yep.
don't forget
Sure.
the things that
Yep.
Sharon has said to that. So the one that's in front of us is the turkey bill, correct? Did anybody want to change the opposed? Okay, so we're going to stay with the opposed. Joycelyn, go ahead and go with the rest of your report, and we'll finish up with
And this
the
isn't-
message that we would like to send to the author.
Wonderful.
Okay, go
And
ahead.
this isn't in your materials, but I wanted to let you know that the Public Employee Pension Transparency Act that we've seen for several of the past years has been reintroduced. It's HR 6290, requires additional reporting that may put our funding and other financials in an adverse light and confuse the situations more with additional numbers that are out there. And non-compliance with the legislation, if it were to pass, results in forfeiture of federal tax benefits to bonds. And there was a bill 2 years ago that the board took an opposed position on. This is very similar to that with a few minor tweaks. And so without objection, I wanted to indicate that opposed position to Congress. What number is that again?
So I think what you need to do, Joycelyn, is kind of flesh that out a little bit for the board.
Sure.
This is Devin Nunez's, it's a reiteration of Devin Nunez's legislation that he sponsored a couple of years ago to Congress. It's called the Public Employee Pension Transparency Act.
Correct. Yes.
Correct? And you might want to talk about the organizations that are pro, con, that kind of thing, if you would, please.
And so the bill that was introduced 2 years ago that the board took a position on was HR 4822. And before the bill was introduced this year, there was an effort amongst the organizations that broadly represent in pensions, so NASRA, NCTR, other pension systems, that sent letters to discourage people from signing on as co-authors when it was being contemplated. And obviously then went ahead and was reintroduced with three co-authors. So there are 4 people that are sponsors of the measure. And I think what's different this year that we've learned about is that there's sort of a super committee that's operating in Congress, and they're looking at multi-employer plans, which were not one in the traditional sense. So this is kind of like the Teamsters, and there's some in the Midwest, and those are having difficulty with funding. That committee is looking at them. And I think part of the concern is, will they kind of branch out into public pension systems and looking at those, which are not in the same situation. As you know, we have our funding plan. We're taking care of any issues we were seeing in our funding and are now on track to full funding with AB 1469 when it passed. So the thought may be that HR 6290, as it's introduced now, may eventually get tacked on to that committee's work. And so that's one reason we might want to make sure we indicate where we stand on this measure.
And the organizations, NCTR, National Council of Teacher Retirement's been against it. I think public labor groups at the national level have also opposed it.
Right.
And I think what Joycelyn is asking of us is to reiterate our original opposition to the previous bill. Harry?
I think we should strongly reiterate our opposition to the previous bill.
Is there a second? Are you putting that forward as a motion? It's been moved and seconded to oppose the new, is it HR?
6290.
I should realize that. HR 6290, Devin Nunez. Is there any further consideration, comments? All in favor of the opposed, say aye. Aye. Hang on a second. All in favor of the opposed, say aye. All opposed to the opposed, say nay.
That is a little bit of a.
I know, I threw myself off. Nay. All right, we will oppose that bill.
Abstention.
Oh, abstentions, thank you. See, I threw myself off again. Thank you, Brian. All righty. Anything else, Joyce?
Yes, and just to update on our sponsored legislation, we had our requirement for electronic funds transfer for contributions, AB 2052, and that was signed by the governor yesterday. So eventually we will be coming back to the board for help with triggering the implementation. So that will be coming your way. No timeline yet on that. And then our housekeeping bill, SB 1165, continues to move through the process and will be heard in Assembly Appropriations when the legislature returns. And just to mention another effort that we've had ongoing over the last couple of months, me and my staff have been going to the legislature to meet about CalSTRS priorities and just to give some background and some contact information to the different legislative offices. And so we're on track to have met with 80 offices coming up very shortly. So I believe it's 77 have been completed and 3 are on the books. So that's out of 120 legislators.
How many of that is with the actual legislator?
So we've met about with, I would say, 5 to 8 legislators.
Predominantly
meeting with staff, yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? All righty. Going back to the message that we would like to give to Senator Pan, I think that we really appreciate the effort to help us out. That we appreciate the responsiveness to the issue we brought before them. I don't think we need to apologize, but we look forward to working with the office to try to come up with a better solution. Anybody else?
Harvey's back there.
Harvey, come on up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Harvey Lederman, Reed Smith, Fiduciary Council. One of the things that I found troubling about this bill was that it appeared to deputize CalSTRS as an agent of the legislature. In other words, doing a job that the legislature assigned to us. And I think Ms. Paquin was right to ask the question, and how does that impact our fiduciary responsibilities? Seems to me that that would tend to require us to take into consideration things that other than the interests of CalSTRS. But to Ms. Hendricks' point, well, how could we fix it? Is there something we could do better? I think it would be a different bill if it said that before the legislature acted or before it cleared the PERS committee, for example, something like that, that they would need what I'll equate to an environmental impact report. They would need a pension impact report from CalSTRS, CalPERS, and UC as to how it would impact, any particular divestment bill would impact our system. And then we could weigh in from our own interests and have the opportunity so we weren't rushed, as Mr. Aylman pointed out, but that we had the opportunity before a bill went further, that at least we could say, well, here's how we see it for CalSTRS, as opposed to making us an engine of the state legislature, which I think would tend to force us to take into consideration things broader than just the interest of CalSTRS. So that's one possible response that we could go back to the author with and say, ask us for how this impacts us before the bill proceeds, and we'll be happy to do that.
All right, thank you, Harvey, I appreciate that. Is there any other input from any other board members back to the author? Other than the comments we've already made during the session and the discussion of the item? All right. Joycelyn?
Just to note, I believe we have a law that requires us actually to provide analysis to the legislature when there are matters like this that come before them. So we do have that in the statute.
So say that again, please.
I'm trying to look for where the note is in the analysis, but there's already law. Oh, I know where it's at. Let me go back here.
So let me just go this way. If there's already law that they have to have an analysis by CalSTRS before they move forward with divestiture bills?
So specifically it says, so it's Education Code Section 22330 requires the board to provide the legislature with an analysis of the asset and liability implications of each bill that would affect the investment strategy of the system, the funding of the plan, or the benefit structure of the plan, and stipulates that neither fiscal committee of the legislature can hear the bill until the analysis is provided to the committee. So this is how our regular process works, is that we provide that analysis, and it generally...
But quite frequently, there are hearings on divestiture bills before our analysis is complete. Correct, Chris?
And they're typically in the policy committees, and so this is for the fiscal committee side of things. It can happen. I mean, I agree, there probably are occasions, I don't know how many, but
so possibly another way to go about providing input would be to ask that be expanded to the policy committees as well as the fiscal committees. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. All righty. Have we always been able to provide that analysis before they go through the fiscal committees?
Not necessarily. It depends on the board calendar.
So we would really want to, another thing would be actually not only to expand it to the policy committees, but to strengthen it, that it does not move forward until that analysis is done and that they follow the policy that they've already set.
Correct. I think there would be some discussion if we were to request those kind of amendments to that section of the education code about, being, the legislative process being delayed by our process and the interaction between that.
Right.
So I don't know whether they would want to tie
right.
their hands to that.
Yeah, I'm sure they wouldn't want us to drag our feet either, so absolutely. All righty, thank you.
Of course.
Moving on to the next item.
Thank you.
And we're about 30 minutes behind schedule, everybody. Just kind of a time check for the day. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning. Hello. Ready? Okay. So today we are going through the project budget. We'll go over what we did since we met last time, what progress we made. We also reaching out to a lot of pension funds across USA, and we'll share what experience we are gaining from them. We'll talk about the challenges, risk, and mitigation. We'll give you some preview about the project metrics, and then the next steps. So what we will do usually, we go, Andrew and I will take the turn, and just when he will start the project budget, I just want to let you know in the audience, we have a senior staff from financial services, Dick Schroeder. He is with us since the day we start the project. So any specific question you have about the budget, he can help us.
Okay, thank you. So, as you know, Change Order 130B was approved in May, and that moved our scheduled implementation of the last functional rollout, FR3, to February of 2022, and also extended the scheduled project end date to January 2023 after a one-year warranty and maintenance and operations period. We have evaluated projected costs through FY 1920, the fiscal year in which the project was originally scheduled to end, and through FY 21-22, the fiscal year the project is now expected to be implemented. After this cost review, staff believe that the current budget needs to be amended to include the $34 million CGI contract amendment approved by the board in February as the rebaselined project budget. Rebaselining the budget at $285.8 million provides sufficient authority through FY 1920, and allows staff to utilize the coming fiscal year, the one that we are currently in, FY 18-19, to assemble a more complete picture of the total additional cost required to successfully complete the project. Staff will update the project budget change proposal during 1920, and the timing is appropriate for this exercise as it allows us to obtain significant additional information, including FR1 being in user acceptance testing, the functional demonstrations that will demonstrate FR2 functionality will be nearly complete. The contractor acceptance testing phase for functional rollout 2 will be underway, and our fit gap exercise for the third functional rollout will be complete. Staff believes that the most responsible way to move forward with the Pension Solution project from a budgetary perspective is to request the board approve a budget augmentation to support projected costs through the project's initial end date of August 2020. Specifically, we request the board approve adding the $34 million contract amendment to CGI into the overall Pension Solution budget, raising the total approved budget from $251.8 million to $285.8 million. These projections in this slide represent staff's or our estimate for the funding needed through system implementation in February 2022, based on information available at this point in time, and also provided that there are no changes going forward. the extension of the project schedule through the implementation in February 2022 results in shortfalls to several line items, as you can see, including internal staff, external contractors, and vendors. We believe costs are likely to increase beyond the amount shown in this slide based on the experience we've gained in the project activities to date and as discussed in the previous slide. So that was the budgetary portion. If you have any questions before I advance to the next slide, we're happy to take them now. Yes.